Known as the godfather of soul, James Brown's work still influences the music industry more than 6 years after his death. A feature film about his life hits theaters today. And as Ephraim Graham shows us, the church played a big influence on his life and legacy.
James Brown's story is a real-life tale of rags to riches with a few bumps on the journey.
He had to fend for himself, so he became a hustler.
Journalist Bill Carpenter listened to Brown as a child, covered him as an adult, and writes about him in his book, Uncloudy Days, the Gospel Music Encyclopedia.
He grew up in the Great Depression, born in 1933 in Barnwell, South Carolina. Poorer than poor were his own words. He said poor people looked down on him. He was so poor. And he came from a very dysfunctional family where his parents were not in the home. He was raised by his Aunt Honey, who sort of ran a boarding house.
At age 16, long before becoming the godfather of soul, James Brown went from Aunt Honey's boarding house to a Georgia jailhouse for armed robbery. It was there that his true love of music was actually born. It's a story he shared with CBN's Scott Ross more than 30 years ago.
They turned me loose to sing gospel one morning, and we went out and took about 5 prisoners with us to sing gospel, and the warden realized that he turned all of us loose. And we got there, everybody was crying because we had them singing. Oh, our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
While he was in prison, he met someone named Byrd, who went on to become a very integral part of his band. And Bobby's family was, deeply in the church. And when he came out of prison, he and Bobby started a gospel group called the Starlighters.
The Starlighters eventually became James Brown and the Famous Flames.
God made your ears. You didn't make them. You gonna argue with God's ears? If it sound good and it feel good, then it's musical.
Their meteoric rise in the music industry is masterfully told in the feature film Get On Up.
Like the title say, Papa's got a brand new bag.
Chadwick Boseman, who played Jackie Robinson in 42, leads the all-star cast.
Our music is still affected by, what he started because it was such an innovation.
Much of that innovation came from Brown's childhood, growing up in church.
At one point when he was a kid, he thought he wanted to be a preacher because he really enjoyed watching how they stirred the audience.
Brown writes about one preacher in particular in his autobiography, The Godfather of Soul, a flamboyant evangelist known as Sweet Daddy Grace. Grace started the denomination, the United House of Prayer for All People.
And he sat in this big red throne, and he had a cape and a crown. And James Brown just looked at it in amazement. And that is where he got that sense of pageantry that was in his the 1960s shows when he was wearing the cape. And when you look at those performances like Please, 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 it's like a revival service.
Brown's revival-like performances come back to life on the big screen and on New York's famous Apollo stage in Get On Up. Rock music royalty Mick Jagger is one of the film's producers.
The fact that someone like Mick Jagger has produced a film about James Brown, and then he talks about the things he liked about James Brown, all those things are things from the church. And that's the influence that sometimes we forget that these things came from church.
Ephraim Graham, CBN News.
And you'll be able to see Scott Ross's entire interview with James Brown on the 700 Club on Monday, August 4th.